everybody, and welcome to Talking Horticulture. This is our 7th episode, and today we will be discussing invasive weeds in Ireland. So a lot of people would be looking at a lot of the signs driving through the country of Japanese knotweed or Himalayan balsam or gunnera or a few of these real troublesome weeds that we have around the country. Michael, what's the story with invasive weeds in Ireland? Why are they such a big problem for us?
So, in our invasive weeds, I suppose one of the most commonly recognizable names is Japanese knotweed. And Japanese knotweed, I suppose, is most widely known for the damage, I suppose, that it can cause to built environment, such as, walls or houses. And where you have places, I suppose good examples was in the UK, where it made its way up through the foundations of houses and caused huge amounts of subsidence and that sort of thing. And also the difficulty in actually killing it. The other problem with it is its persistence in growing. So when a small piece of it's cut, either with a hedge cutter or a strimmer, it's easily spread further down the line. And then we have the likes of our giant hogweed would come under that, and Himalayan balsam. I suppose they would be what I would cover under that. In Ireland, these aren't covered under the Noxious Weed Act, which covers the likes of ragwort, thistles, and docks. That dates back to 1937, I think it is.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so the noxious weeds are more kind of associated with probably agricultural practices and issues in terms of grazing cattle and stuff. So that's where your ragwort and thistles would be an issue, I suppose. But these are more kind of specific in terms of their problem, invasive weeds. And how they are causing absolute carnage around the country in terms of how they're spreading and how they're, like we mentioned Japanese knotweed, how it's almost very impossible to kill almost and very easy to propagate. It's probably one of the most easy things to propagate because it spreads via its roots. And then, like you said, the smallest little bit that falls into a watercourse could float down the river and start a new clump a couple of miles downstream. Have these been brought into the country, Michael, or are these aren't native as such?
No, so Japanese knotweed would have come in here as I think it came in as one of these things that was gifted to an estate as a plant, and I think it spread from there. I could be corrected on that now, but no, there wouldn't be, and so they find that our climate suits them well. They've a range of growing conditions: full shade, high temperature, high salinity. They'll tolerate a bit of drought. They like it along a water course because they can spread easily. Their seeds drop into it and it flows down along it. So, you find maybe on derelict construction sites, you would see them coming up as well. They'll come up in that rough ground. So that's, I think, why they're so hardy, that they're able to really take off. Then, of course, what happened was, from the likes of tractor and hedge cutters going along roadsides, they were spread much more easily than, it was carried along on the machine. So it kind of became a bigger issue. They're native of Japan, obviously, Korea, Taiwan, China, that sort of thing. And now it's widespread across Europe, really.
So these plants, a lot of these plants would have been brought in a couple of hundred years ago into big estates and stuff like that for the well-to-do people who had hundreds and hundreds of acres in Ireland, and they wanted to bring a nice little token back from their travels or from around the world. A lot of them might have brought it back for like cover for game, like for shooting pheasants or stuff like that, and plonked it down in the garden, and then just, hey presto, after a couple of years, big problem. And it's like, do you think there's anything else coming down the track? Like, we're importing plants the whole time from all around the world and different things. We probably don't know what's going to be the next invasive weed until 20, 30 years time, I suppose.
Yeah, I think we're being a bit more careful than people were back then in regards to plant passports and bringing in clean plants, but that's becomes down to the importance of trying to be able to supply our own plants and our own native plants. So as regards what you could say would be the next big invasive species, it's hard. I wouldn't be able to put a guess on that one now. It's I don't know. Is there anything that you've heard of yourself coming along the line?
It's just from going around. Like you look at some of these kind of very showy kind of bamboos and grasses that have gone in that are extremely kind of aggressive in their growth habit. Very similar kind of Japanese knotweed. They grow via their roots or easily kind of spread. Like I think when you look at how quickly they can take over an area, now I know they're not going to be as easy transferred into hedgerows and stuff like that, but like I've gone into gardens and been trying to dig out huge big clumps of bamboo, and they're an absolute nightmare. Like I think they could be an issue. So if you're getting bamboo, I would be looking at getting clump forming ones rather than ones that are going to spread out all over your garden. That's what I'd be only looking at, I suppose. A big one down the south of the country is the rhododendrons, and they're really taking over some of the lovely parks down Killarney and stuff like that. It's a huge problem down there.
Yeah, I always said as well, kind of towards down the west of Ireland was Mount Brescia. It was kind of an orange flowered with a green long leaf on it. You'd see it on the roadsides down there a lot. Yeah, I suppose that was a big problem. I don't really ever noticed down there as well that fuchsia took off exceptionally well in the west of Ireland, and roadsides were covered in it.
Yeah, like it's kind of we're kind of branching into like a sort of a subcategory of almost, they're not invasive weeds, but they're probably problematic weeds down the line. Like they're like you said, Montbretia, or like chatting earlier on about mare's tail and those sort of things, that they're not invasive, so to speak, but they're bloody hard to get rid of.
Yeah, so they outcompete our native plants, I suppose, is what we'd be trying to pick out there, or trying to focus on there as other things do. So if we were to look at the tree that we kind of said we'd look at, which was our Japanese knotweed, say the Himalayan balsam and your hogweed, well, the threat from to your person from Japanese knotweed is going to be minimal. The Himalayan balsam, I don't think that has any threat to your person. But if we look at the hogweed, that's a dangerous little bucko, isn't it? That can give you a good old rash. Did you ever suffer from anything like that, or get a doing of it?
Yeah, like I've never come across a giant hogweed, but I've been burnt by our native hogweed many times, but I'd trimming, and the sap from the hogweed can cause really, really bad burns to your skin. Like it's very, very dangerous plant, and it grows everywhere. The native hogweed is quite common, and it's in all the hedgerows and in a lot of the woodlands, and it's relatively harmless until you just either break a bit off or you come in contact with it, and it can cause awful burns to yourself.
Yeah, I have seen some giant hogweed there last week. I was looking at a piece of it. It would be quite, maybe not for everybody, but when I seen it myself, very distinctive, as opposed to the lesser hogweed that we would find commonly here. But that I have suffered from the burns from that, like yourself, from strimming. So for anybody that's been out on the side of a road, maybe strimming a piece, and they've found their arm blistered and damaged, that's usually what it is. It's hogweed, which can be easily mixed up with cow parsley. I always find people always see that white flower growing on the side of the road, and mix up the two.
Very very similar. Yeah, they're very similar kind of flower heads. The cow parsley will be slightly earlier flowering, and the hogweed will come in slightly later. But what kind of size are you talking difference between like our the little hogweed that's like cow parsley, I suppose, in size? What size is the giant hogweed getting, Michael?
Well, giant hogweed can grow much higher than your average adult, and your leaf, the leaves would be maybe a foot and maybe more in length, much more a much broader spread on it compared to our native hogweed. So a much more kind of a distinctive, I felt, jagged edge to it. How would you say? I suppose I felt it was more intimidating looking than a normal hogweed.
It's like something from Jurassic Park, isn't it?
Yeah, and it can be. It's hard to. I suppose it maybe for me, I felt that it was easier to identify or easier to figure out from your native hogweed, I suppose.
Yeah, it's just massive. Like it's huge. It is a massive big plant.
Like you could, yeah, it could be 5 meters at least in height.
Yeah, they can be quite big now, and like it is like something that you would kind of stumble across and you'd be like, that just doesn't look right. It's similar to the gunnera, which is what people would probably class as the giant rhubarb, which is a similar kind of invasive weed in the country. Like that again, that's like your standard rhubarb on steroids, like something out of a science fiction novel. Like they're massive big plants, and again, it does like the kind of wetter, marshier ground along your rivers or lakes. That's the habit of our invasive weeds, where they can kind of spread easily, I suppose.
Yeah. So the thing about it is, just to mention as well, the reason that the sap is so toxic is that when it hits your skin, it reacts with the light, reacts with the air that way, and that's where you get that reaction to your skin.
It's UV light that when you get hit with hogweed sap, it's only when it gets hit with UV light, which is rays of sun, that it reacts with your skin, and then these massive blisters will show up. And like you could have problems with that area for many years afterwards. Like your skin will be permanently kind of weakened for a long time afterwards. I've heard horror stories of people having issues after getting badly stung with hogweed for a long time after they had the initial burns.
Yeah, it's phototoxic, I think is the name of that. And in Ireland, in the Wildlife Act 2000, I think it states that anyone who plants or causes, to plants anything that's exotic in a wild state or into the state of Ireland, say, either flora or flowers, roots, seeds, spores, anything like that, is actually an offence, a criminal offence. So that's where hogweed would come in, but it's not actually. There's no specific legislation that actually addresses it as such to deal with it. So it can kind of freely spread itself there. People might see it and maybe can be drawn to it because of if you see one that's at its natural height. So I suppose that's important that people are aware of what it actually is.
So I've been down to a few of the parks around the country, especially around Dublin, and what you'll see is usually a sign for, probably the most common one in the parks in Dublin is Japanese knotweed, and it's do not cut, do not go in here. It's probably taped off with some sort of barrier, and it's being controlled. It's being controlled within the confines of the county councils. Like I was around a few of the parks, and all you see is dead foliage, I suppose, from after it's been treated. How do you kill it, Michael? Like, is it the same as going in with just spraying a knapsack of weed killer on it, or how are they maintained?
So what many people have been doing is one thing is stem injections with the likes of a glyphosate and other chemical products to kill it. The glyphosate is once or the stem injection is quite good because it goes straight into it. It gets a strong dose of it, I suppose. The people are putting on a foliar spray as well of weed killers. You get many people who might have a patch of it on their farm or at their house or anywhere like that, and are spraying it, because I will post it later on this evening, is a map of how invasive it is in Ireland. So many more people are treating it at home, and if as I've advised people myself, if you can treat it with foliar spray and it's working, then do that. The Himalayan balsam, which we'll touch on as well in a bit, is many people are just pull it and remove it, and bag it. And then the giant hogweed, again, a foliar spray is what most people would do there to kill that off.
Yeah, because it is. Earlier in the week, we did put out questions to ask people to send in questions if they had any queries on invasive weeds and stuff like that. And one of the questions came in, kind of links in nicely, is the best way to get rid of invasive weeds once they're treated. So, like, I suppose what we're saying is, if you are getting rid of it, you have to get rid of it in a very sensible way, that you're not spreading this from site to site. Like, you don't want to be bringing your dead foliage, your Himalayan balsam or your Japanese knotweed, or to other sites to be composted or anything like that. Like, what's your thoughts on that? What would you say to how would people get rid of the invasive weeds once they've been treated?
Yeah, you have to be super careful about that. Because you decide, or maybe even unknowingly, you're bagging it up, bringing it into your local green waste facility, and it goes into that, and then it's just spreading it further and further on. So if you were unsure about a weed that was invasive, or you felt that it was an issue, separate it from your other green waste and bag it. But Japanese knotweed, if it is in your garden, you're better just to leave it. Whatever dies off, just leave it there for the moment. There's no need to start trying to pull out and clear it away. It's unnecessary straight off anyway.
Better off leaving it and letting it biodegrade in situ, and that removes any of the risk of it being translocated to another site. I suppose that's the answer to that question, I suppose. And then another question that came in actually was, is there, and we kind of touched on it actually, is there an issue or a risk associated with using chemicals to treat invasive weeds? They mentioned knotweed beside watercourses. So, like, I know myself from using weed killer around watercourses, I think we have to be 5 meters away from the watercourse before we can spray to stop drift and all that sort of stuff. What's your thoughts on that, Michael?
Yeah, so going on if we were to go on the advice of Tagish, their advice on treating it is not to treat it, not to apply chemicals near a watercourse. So we don't want to be using foliar spray near a watercourse or that sort of thing. We need to try and avoid that. But many would use the stem injection method near a watercourse, because you're not just lashing it out around the place. I know in the UK what some sites were doing was actually digging it up with a digger, running it through a trommel screen to get the roots out, and then they were cutting away the top, burning that at a suitable time of year, as we still can here, burn bushes, burning the tops, and then trommel screening the soil.
A lot of work. That's a lot of work.
Huge amount of work. Then that was trying to avoid using chemical near a water course, So it's a tricky one there, to get that, because it's the damage that it does with rooting in a riverbank can be massive.
So just to kind of elaborate on like what Michael's saying about the stem injections for people that aren't aware of what that is, and how is that better than kind of foliar application, is it's basically a massive syringe, I suppose, that you inject into the stems of your invasive weed, and it's done in a very controlled manner, that you're doing it low to the ground, usually about the first or second node of the plant off the ground, and you're injecting it into the stem. So you're not actually wildly spraying around. So that's where the stem injection is much more controlled, and it's usually a neater mix, Michael, is it? It's usually a much more stronger mix. You're using less of it, but a stronger mix of it.
Yeah, many people would do that. I've actually seen where people were putting it in neat, but that's too strong.
Yeah.
And that, that would be overkill on that. It's unnecessary, So yeah, that is very true. People do that. Yeah.
I was actually looking at like alternative methods of how to control Japanese knotweed there, and I came across this crowd over in the UK who do the send electric current through the plant, and they basically explode the plant via electricity. So you will put with a generator and an electrode, you'll touch the stem of a hogweed, and it'll basically blow it up from the inside out, roots and all. I thought it was very interesting because it's a much more it's like when we're talking about chemicals and water courses, that's a much safer way of doing things, I suppose. But then someone mentioned to me, well, how would you get the thing down to a water bank through a field or a marsh that you wouldn't be able to bring a Jeep down to or whatnot? But yeah, I thought it was interesting to see the alternative methods, because mechanical eradication of these weeds can be very costly and very time consuming, I suppose.
Yes, and my secretary here has just handed me a very good piece of information, which is a question. Another question: is Japanese knotweed a regulated species in Ireland? And the answer to that is yes. Would you believe? So there's another turn up for the books. Under Regulation 49-2, any person who plants, disperses, allows, or causes to disperse, spread, or otherwise causes to grow Japanese knotweed or any of the other invasive plants listed in the third schedule of the European Community's Birds and Natural Habitats Regulation 2011 shall be guilty of an offence. So just said I'd pop that in there.
There you go. So I think like why Japanese knotweed is kind of the poster boy of invasive weeds is that it is like it is so like there's problems with it over in the States and the UK that people can't sell their houses because it's in their back garden. Like it can be very restrictive in selling your property or developing even land if it's on it. Like it really has to be treated very carefully, or else you could have massive bills or restrictions in place if you don't deal with it properly.
Yeah, the damage it can do, and it's also under those regulations I just mentioned there, that it's an offence to not to do something about it.
Yeah, it's a very troublesome one. Like I've seen pictures of it coming up through tarmac. It's such a strong plant to be able to break through concrete or break through tarmac. It's unbelievable. It really is. It's a very invasive and troublesome plant. It has to be said, like. But there's the further you get away from Dublin, Michael, it's spreading along our hedgerows. It's our the way we maintain our hedgerows is a very big cause of Japanese knotweed spreading, that people just are uneducated or don't know about it, or just a bit in the dark. Was that fair to be said, I suppose?
Yeah, I think so. Last summer I was in holidays in Kerry, and I was doing a bit of hill walking and that up some back roads and minor roads, and it was growing freely as ever along the side of these roads with no mapping of it. Or no marking on it, should I say. It may have been mapped or may have been noted, but it's possible that it's going to spread hugely further and further on.
So what do you mean by mapping, Michael? Is that's I know that's something that you would do in your line of work. You would know of the mapping invasive weeds and kind of tracking the spread of them, or kind of noting what has been done or not done with invasive weeds?
Yeah, so many local authorities now would be surveying for Japanese knotweed and other invasive plants, and they would mark these take a map of their county and mark these locations on the map, and then from that we would build a countrywide map of the Japanese knotweed location, so we know what it's spread, we know how much it's spreading over the years. We can also then go back to county basis. We can say what's been killed off and what hasn't been killed off, which is very important. It gives us an idea then of how we're dealing with the problem, and from that we'd also be detailing how it's being controlled. So whether the use of chemical on it is working, whether it's not working, how much chemical has been used, and whether it's been continuously treated each year or whether a year was skipped, whether it was missed, anything like that is all caught up on this. And then it gives a database to access over time then, as well as that,
Very good, yeah. So it's costly to maintain, Michael, is it? Like it's only the county councils that would have a lot of manpower and a lot of resources to be able to control this. But if you went to, let's say, one of the smaller counties like Leitrim, say, or Offaly or something, where their resources and the money coming in to maintain the green spaces would be far less, they're really up against it to try and get this under control, I suppose.
Yeah, like many places may not have the manpower to get out to survey this. And the other thing is having a trained member of staff to recognize this and recognize the consequences of it, and what from that to build on what is the best answer here, to what is the best way of disposing of this, or the best way of dealing with it. Like for cases where it's where I was mentioned earlier that it's been removed from the site, it's the National Biodiversity Centre of Ireland recommend that it go for deep landfill. So that's fine, maybe, as you said there, for someone who has the capabilities of organizing such a thing, but it's not everybody would have that. There's also a licensing situation where they say that you should apply to the National Parks and Wildlife Service for a license, and that it should only be transported then by a licensed waste carrier, because it is going for landfill. It's classed as waste, and it's also an invasive, so it needs to be carried or transported in a proper manner so that it's not going to spread as well. So as you said, it's having all of these capabilities to deal with it in such a way, because you might be listening to this thinking, Jesus, this stuff sounds like it's nuclear waste. It's hard to describe how invasive it actually is, and how by just having a small piece of it, or a couple of seeds, how quick it can spread in an area.
Like it is, you're like you said there, if you planted a 1 liter pot of Japanese knotweed down in the back of your garden, in the space of 5 years, your back garden out the back of your standard semi-D would probably be completely engulfed Japanese knotweed. It is ferociously aggressive in its growth habit, and it is a big problem. I just saw something that came across my desk there not too long ago, actually, was that they've they've eased up on that favorite term of mine in procurement legislation in terms of getting work done and stuff like that, that you have to go through the correct procedures and all. But in terms of the management of invasive species, they've made it a bit more flexible to procure money to manage these things. So the government are taking it a lot more seriously and realizing that maybe you don't really have the time to go and get your tree prices, or there mightn't even be tree contractors that might be able to control this weed. So like time is of the essence. Like every year that goes by that you don't control it, it's making a bigger problem for the next person coming down the track.
Yeah, definitely. And now is the best time to take action on that, you know. So if you felt that it's as we mentioned back in other podcasts in relation to trees and all of that sort of thing, if you're unsure about something, call in an expert or call in someone who knows to get a look at it and ID it and get it dealt with as soon as you can.
So yeah, that kind of sums up invasive weeds, and we hope you enjoyed the podcast today. And haven't scared you off if it's a plant that you may have in your garden that is potentially invasive. But look, there's plenty of resources out there for you to go and find out, and the right way to go about and controlling these weeds, because time is of the essence with these things. Really, the sooner you act with them, the more easier they are to control. So every year you let them grow and expand, the harder it's going to get them back to a more controllable level. So that kind of sums up what we were chatting about today. And next week we're going to be talking about compost and potting media. So I'll be looking at the different challenges that we're facing here in Ireland with our peat being stopped being used in the country, and look at the alternatives that we might be using. So look, tune into the podcast next week, and take care.